I'm Charlie Bingham, Principal Corporate Counsel for Microsoft and a very proud member of the Georgia Justice Project Board. I want to welcome all of you, friends, clients, and supporters of the Georgia Justice Project and the Georgia Chamber of Commerce to this timely and much needed conversation on second chance hiring. During this period of the Great Resignation, I think this discussion is needed now more than ever. It's a critical time for those who are seeking to better themselves and support their families through stable employment, as well as help companies who are facing a labor shortage. I volunteered for the Georgia Justice Project Clinic a couple of years ago and learned firsthand just how critical gainful and stable employment is for individuals seeking a second chance. This issue has impacted those in my family and close friends who've made mistakes in the past. I later jumped at the opportunity to join the Georgia Justice Project Board to assist with this impactful work. And I'm very happy to be here. Also, Microsoft, my employer, has been a longtime supporter of the Georgia Justice Project because, frankly, Microsoft's mission to empower others to do more aligns very closely with Georgia Justice Project's initiatives. Whether other corporations realize it or not, I think this issue impacts them as well. And I think during this Great Resignation, we're finding out just how far-reaching the issues that Georgia Justice Project tackles every day are. So with that said, again, welcome. I'd like to say thank you for joining this important discussion. And now I am going to pass the floor to Chris Clark, President and CEO of the Georgia Chamber, to say a few words on behalf of our co-sponsor. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Charlie. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you all today, and thank all of you for joining us for this important discussion. You know, the Georgia Chamber looks at this issue of second chance hiring maybe from a little different lens than a lot of you. I've been traveling the state of Georgia since May of this year, surveying our members and small businesses around the state, and this issue of talent keeps coming up. The labor crisis shortage continues to be the #1 issue for businesses. And let me give you some statistics to put this in perspective. Georgia's just had a record-breaking year for economic development. We've recruited more projects than we have in our history of our state. Large companies, distribution, headquarters, manufacturing moving to Georgia, to the tune of almost 380 new companies investing almost $11 billion more in our state this year alone. Now, those numbers are great, but here's the little Achilles heel that we have. In September, we had 333,000 job openings in this state. That number is just awesome to think about. But here's the problem. We only had 181,000 people on unemployment. So we know right there that there's a skills gap, there's an employment gap, there's a labor shortage. Now, pre-COVID, we had some of the same issues. I guess recent study by McKinsey showed that pre-COVID, for every 3 jobs open in Georgia, there was only 1 Georgian looking for a job. And so we know as companies continue to move to the state, they're moving here for access to talent, for diverse talent, but we have to do a better job of addressing their talent needs. And we believe, quite frankly, right now, there are a lot of Georgians that are on the sidelines that could be working, that want to work, but because of regulatory barriers, because of stigmas, because of misconceptions, they're not given an equal chance to be at the table. And so that's why we've been here. That's why we've engaged with the Georgia Justice Project. That's why we're talking about this issue. I was in Washington, Georgia, and Wilkes County yesterday talking about this very issue. The Georgia Chamber looks forward to partnering with anyone on this call to encourage employers, to partner employees with employers, to address what we believe is going to be a long-term labor crisis issue, but also we know it's the right thing to do at the end of the day. So we are extremely honored to be part of this discussion today. We are excited that you're joining us and you care enough to spend part of your early Friday morning on a Zoom call with us. But to get into the meat of today's discussion, I want to turn it over to Doug Amara, who's the Executive Director of the Georgia Justice Project. And truly, Doug, you're an inspiration for so many of us, and we appreciate not really your leadership, but your servant heart that you carry with you and the work that you do. So again, thank you for being with us, and we look forward to working with you. Doug, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for those really kind words, but also very insightful comments about where we are in the state and the issues that we're dealing with. So I'm going to do just a few things here to sort of set the stage around criminal justice and a little bit about our work, GJP is what we like to call it, Georgia Justice Project's work around employers and overall. So let me just set the stage about criminal justice in Georgia and just some numbers. So this slide is going to come up here as I like to call the arc of justice, but it really just talks about the criminal justice system in three parts, which most folks do: front end, middle, and back end. Anywhere from policing to when the case is over at the end of the red arc. The middle is obviously incarceration, and back end is anywhere when the case is over and someone's either out of jail or prison or on probation or parole, or even has long since exited the criminal justice system. With regard to numbers, in Georgia, we have roughly 90,000 people altogether, about 40,000 people in jail, about 54,000 people in prison, so about 90,000 people incarcerated. But that doesn't paint the whole picture, because most folks, when they talk about criminal justice, talk about folks under correctional control. And what that number is it adds those who are incarcerated, those first 90,000, with everyone who's on probation and parole. And that's about 527,000 people in Georgia, roughly. That number makes Georgia the nation's leader per capita on folks who are under correctional control. 1 in 18 people are either in jail, prison, or on probation or parole in Georgia. And then the last data point I'll give with relating to Georgia is the other part of this picture is even if you're out of the system, you're not in jail, not in prison, not on probation, not on parole, but you've been arrested and have a criminal record, not even convicted. In Georgia, 4.3 million people, roughly 40% of our population, have that issue. Nationally, it's as high anywhere from 25 to 30%. Georgia, it's about 40%. So 40% of Georgians have a criminal record that can be found, arguably, when they go to look for a job. So, and let me paint this even more direly for you, this idea of correctional control and how far off Georgia is on this issue. This is a chart of every state in the country, which shows the percentages of folks per capita folks under correctional control. The different colors in those charts and the bar graph shows the different types of control. But the most important thing here is that Georgia leads the country, as I've already said, but we don't just lead the country, we lead by far. And we lead primarily because of that orange part of the bar graph, which is probation, mainly felony probation. So we aren't just out in front in the country for folks under correctional control. We are way out in front, mainly because we have so many people, roughly 200,000 people, 200,000 Georgians who are on felony probation because there's no cap to probation in Georgia. And many of you who are employers and workforce development folk know you've seen this come up on people's criminal records with long probated sentences, but that just gives you a perspective for the rest of the country. And of course, we can't talk about the system without talking about disparity around race. And these two charts paint another picture as with regard to racial disparities in the system. The first one is just about incarceration, those who are either in jail or prison. And this chart shows the percent of population for folks who are white and African-American and Native and Latino on one side, but then on the right, it says this is the percentage in the criminal justice system in jails and prisons. So you can see we have an exactly inverse number with relating to white and black folk in the population versus those who are incarcerated in jail and prison. This is probably not a total shock or not a surprise data, but seeing this data point on a graph always shocks me to realize how disparate the system is. And then the graph on the right, again, not just limiting it to jails and prisons, but what about probation and parole? Probation in particular in the state also has a massive disparity. Here in Fulton County, you can see in the middle of this chart, it shows folks who are under correctional control, probation and parole in Fulton County, and those who are African-American. The disparities get as high as 10 to 15 to 1. Here in this county, I believe it's about 8 to 1 disparity for folk who are African-American who are under felony probation and parole in Georgia. So we all know the system has disparate impacts and outcomes, but this just gives you another perspective on how dire those disparities are. Now, let me just shift for a moment to talk about our work. Some of you know who we are, some of you don't, but I just wanted to, when we talk about we're going to give you a lot of information today. You're going to say, well, how do these guys know what they're talking about? And it really comes from all these buckets of work that we do in every aspect of the criminal justice system. So let me just paint a picture real quick. The longest thing we've done for 35 years is we actually represent people in the criminal courts. We're like a private public defender, but we follow our clients all the way through this arc, if you will, from incarceration into reentry. And that's the thing we've done the longest. And it's sort of our hallmark work, if you will. And then we do follow our folks in prison, but we also in the last 3 years have been working with a new prison in Georgia called the Metro Reentry Facility here in Atlanta, right off Moreland Avenue. And there we have gone into a prison for the first time ever and helping folks remove barriers to reentry before they get out of prison, working really hand in hand with the Department of Corrections towards that same outcome. And we've run into a lot of barriers we could talk about, mainly around fines and fees and driver's license issues and probation issues, which really plague people's ability to reenter the workforce and society successfully. And then on the back end here, on the reentry side, many of you know our work around criminal records, which has become the biggest part of what we do in terms of raw number of people we serve. We represent hundreds and hundreds of people a year, work with thousands, help with expungement or summits around the state. We even open up the first expungement desk or second chance desk in Cobb County earlier this year to address that issue. So that's a big part of our work. And then lastly, I'll say that we do policy work. We decided about 10 or 15 years ago to go upstream and to change the conditions that really lead to the issues we're dealing with and see in our clients and the work we do every day. So as of this year, we've actually been helped pass 21 laws, and 2 of which we'll give a little bit of attention to, if you like, around expungement, expanding expungement last year with the help of a lot of folks on this call, including the chamber, as well as moving the issue around felony probation and helping folks to terminate probation early if they've been rehabilitated, also with the help of a lot of folks on this call today, including the chamber. So that gives you a quick sampling of things that we do. Now let me just drill down a little bit around employment and engagement with employers and why it's so important for us. First of all, we know, and if you do reentry work and follow folks in the criminal justice system, which we've done for 35 years, you know that employment is the linchpin. Many people say statistically, employment is the antidote to recidivism. What I mean by that is statistically, if someone has a job and they have been arrested or convicted of a crime, they are the most likely not to recidivate if they have a job. So we've known for years in direct service, as well as in statistical studies, that employment is so important. So early on in our organization's history, we even opened up our own landscape company to employ our people to give them a job coming out of prison because we knew how vital it was. We actually shut that down in 2010, but we continue to work on employment issues with our clients, particularly the criminal records issues and all of our reentry clients. So out of that work, we decided to sort of lean into employers and find out what is motivating, what are the needs of employers, particularly around the policy side. What can we do to move the needle down at the State House to make it easier or remove barriers for employers to hire folks with a criminal record? So we've had a number of sessions going back almost a decade, one earlier this year, but also that's what this event is about as well, is to talk to employers, find out what the issues are. You'll hear from a number of employers today about what their issues are and what they see. We use these events to create a feedback loop so that we can help make it easier to satisfy the needs of the private sector, at the same time helping our clients get access to employment. And we've also, another thing we've worked with the Governor Deal is Criminal Justice Reform Council, particularly around issues of reentry and removing barriers to reentry. We've seen a lot of willingness from the private sector to help on that because we think it really satisfies the needs of the clients we serve, but also of the broader community. And one other thing we've done, as you've heard me mention, is we've actually had the great support of folks like the Chamber and a number of companies on this call. I think Meg Taylor from Delta will talk about that as well, who've helped move the needle and show up in the legislative arena to make it easier to remove barriers for folks who've been rehabilitated. And then lastly, I'll say the thing we do to sort of keep connected to the private sector is Charlie already talked about, is we have a volunteer lawyer program we've had for a number of years, particularly on our criminal records side. And right now we're averaging over 150 people a year, 150 lawyers who take on a case and represent our clients, folks we screen and our staff works with. But that's also kept us close, our ear to the ground and connected to employers around the state. So I want to just, this is, I think my last slide, I'll just say, I mentioned we've had a number of events. We had a wonderful event in August, just a few months ago, that was co-sponsored by the Federal Reserve Bank and had a number of great speakers and data given. And that, by the way, is available. I think it's on our website, but you can listen to that event and watch it. But I just want to give you some quick learnings or lessons we heard from that event. And the first thing is what was really powerful for me, the economist, Jeffrey Kozenik has written a whole book about this, of why having a higher participation in the workforce, it leads to a stronger economy. We can't keep people out of the workforce and maintain the strength of the overall economy. So he makes a real macroeconomic argument for removing barriers to reentry, particularly around employment. The second thing is that as Chris even already talked about, is that alluded to, is that a second chance hiring, giving folks a chance who can get a job that many companies wouldn't have hired maybe when there isn't a labor shortage, can absolutely address the labor shortage need. So addressing how employers are looking at criminal records is vital to helping solve the labor shortage. This one point I love to talk about, it's called desistance research. It is the basis really for why the EEOC rules in 2012 changed. And that is basically this: a lot of times decisions are often made on what someone did in the past. And if they've committed a crime in the past, no matter how long ago, that often determines whether, well, the perception is that will determine that person's future and whether they'll make a mistake in the future. But actually, the desistance research turns that around and upside down and says, really, the best way to determine future conduct isn't past conduct. It's the distance that's created in time from when that person made a mistake in the past or committed a crime. And the desistance research is really clear that when enough time passes, roughly around 5 years, if someone's not committed another crime, especially a more serious crime, they are very less likely as anybody on this call to commit a crime in the future. So this research is important when you're looking at someone's criminal record. And this point too is important that came out of the research from our friends at the Federal Reserve Bank, is that the best second chance programs, the second chance movements around employment statistically are when nonprofits work with employers directly and help them come together. I think you'll hear today from folks like Lloyd Martin, who will talk about how their company has really had a focused effort on having people re-enter, creating a path, creating a program for folks to come to work for their company. So I think this is an important point to remember. And I know a number of our workforce development friends are on the call and would certainly chime in and agree with that. And lastly, we can't again leave out the issue of race, is that because the criminal justice system, as you heard earlier, is so impacted by the criminal justice system is so impacted by racism, that then when a potential employee comes up to be employed, understanding that impact, some of those numbers I gave you earlier, it's important to understand that, because when you're looking at someone's past, too many times a criminal justice system infused with racist outcomes really will impact the ability to hire someone. So I think if when you understand that, it'll help us break down these barriers even more, and it'll help employers lean into the opportunity to create a second chance employment opportunity for folks who've been touched by the criminal justice system. All right, and I think that is my last slide, and I have the great pleasure of turning it over to my colleague, Brenda Smeaton, who's our legal director, and who will talk and dive a little more deeply into understanding criminal records here in Georgia. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be with you this morning and happy that you have chosen to spend your time with us. As it says, what I'm going to talk about is understanding and using criminal records in Georgia, which is a huge topic that we could talk about for many hours, and I'm going to try to cover some of the highlights in about 20 minutes. So as Doug mentioned, in our recent events, we have talked about why this issue is important to both businesses and the economy. And of course, we know it's important to individuals who have a record. And I think most of you employers who are here recognize the need and are interested in making this happen, which is why you showed up with us this morning. So what I'm going to focus on is what you may be doing with your background checks that may be limiting your ability to hire second chance candidates. So how your screening process may actually be getting in your way. And depending on the size of your company and your role, you may have no contact with this process. Even in a small company where you are the HR person, it's possible that you contract with a private background check company to pull your reports, and you have little understanding of sort of what is happening behind the scenes. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what that process looks like, and then some things to be aware of. And my slides have decided that they want to freeze. All right, there we go. So just to take it very basic, a little bit about criminal backgrounds. Whenever somebody has an interaction with the legal system, a record is created, from arrest records to jail records if they're taken into custody, court records if formal charges are brought about what they were charged with and how the case was resolved, on up to Department of Corrections records if they were convicted and sent to prison. In addition to all of those records that exist, there are unofficial records such as records that may appear on mugshot websites or news articles that may have appeared about this criminal incident. You as an employer are most likely not dealing with those original sources of records. What you're doing is you are going to use a criminal background check report that compiles those records from around the state and from around the country, and brings all those different sources together for you to use when determining whether or not somebody is a good fit for you as an employee. There are, of course, other kinds of background checks that we pull besides criminal backgrounds, whether it's verifying somebody's education or prior employment or credit history, even for some positions, and increasingly doing a social media review. But we're going to focus, of course, on the criminal background check. So in Georgia and in almost all states, there are two different kinds of background checks that employers can pull. They can pull a report from the official database, or they can pull a private background check report, which is what most companies are going to do. But it is important to understand how the official database works in Georgia. So in Georgia, we have an official database that collects information, all the records, the official records that I talked about on the left-hand side of interactions with the criminal justice system. And that's the GCIC database. The Georgia Crime Information Center is the agency that collects all that information together. Primarily, it was founded for law enforcement purposes, and that is the primary use of it, but it is something that is available to employers. If you have an employee's consent, you can pull a copy of their GCIC report. So that is their official Georgia criminal history, showing all the interactions they've had with law enforcement that resulted in an arrest for a fingerprintable offense. So every state has one of these official databases, and they feed into the FBI, the national database run by the National Crime Information Center. Some employers are going to pull an FBI background check, so they're going to pull a nationwide official background check on employers, but that is a limited number of employers. In order to access the FBI database, you have to have access by law to be able to look at it. And the employers that are going to have that access are generally employers that are working with a vulnerable population or that are in high security. So if you are applying with the TSA or to work at a port or to work at a nursing home where you're going to be working with a vulnerable population, then most likely you're getting an FBI background check on that potential employee. But most employers don't have that access, so they're probably going to use a private background check company. If they just used a GCIC report, they would only get what happened in Georgia, and they want to know nationwide whether or not somebody's had some interactions with law enforcement. So they're going to use a private company. There are literally thousands of these companies out there. There's a few big ones that a lot of folks tend to use: HireRight, Sterling Info Systems, ADP, Equifax are some of the big companies. Checker is one that's become really popular in recent years. And what these companies do is they pull all those records together in one place from thousands of sources across the country for you to look at. What you should know about private background checks and these companies is that the companies that do these, they're referred to as consumer reporting agencies, or CRAs, and they are governed by federal law, the Fair Credit Reporting Act. The basics, the overview of that law is that if you are pulling a background check on somebody, one, you've got to have their permission to pull it. Two, if something comes back on that background, that is the reason for you to deny them employment, you are required by both federal and state law to tell them that they were denied because of their background, because of their criminal history. And this is what it was on their criminal history that was the basis of the denial. You then have to give or most likely the company that is pulling your background has to give them an opportunity to look at the report and to dispute it if it's wrong, and if so, to correct the report and reissue it to you as the employer. What these companies are required to do under federal law is to take reasonable steps to ensure the accuracy of their information. So what's going to appear on these reports that you get? Of course, you know, what's important to you is when the person was arrested, how long ago was it, what agency arrested them, what were they charged with. In Georgia, there are literally hundreds of different crimes that you can be charged with, ranging with a broad span. And if you're a national employee, there are literally thousands of charges across the country that a person could be charged with, and often the language of what those charges are and what conduct they entail is very different. You're also going to see how that case was resolved, or what the disposition of the case was. And what I've shown here is some of the different ways that cases can be resolved. And you might think, oh, we're just looking to see if charges against someone were dismissed, because if they were dismissed, you know, you're innocent until proven guilty, so maybe we shouldn't hold that against the person. But if they were convicted, that might be something that we want to consider a little bit more. But it's not that simple, and you will see all these different things on a criminal background report about how a case could have been resolved. It could have been, you know, it could still be pending. They could be in a diversion program. It could have been dismissed, but there's different ways that looks. Maybe they were acquitted at trial, or maybe they got first offender, which is sort of a second chance law in Georgia for first time offenders, and they are still completing that sentence. Or maybe they were convicted, and they were convicted of a misdemeanor, or they were convicted of a felony, a more serious crime, or maybe they pled nolo contendere, which could be a misdemeanor or a felony, and a lot of people don't realize that actually is a conviction. So these are all the things that are going to show up on the report. And, you know, one question that you might have is, well, what about expungement? You know, at GJP, what we do is we help people clean up their criminal history so that when employers pull them, hopefully they won't see things that they've been able to get off their record. So expungement is that record clearing process. That's the word that most states call it. In Georgia, it's actually a two-step process called restriction and sealing. And what you have to do first is you restrict access to it on the GCIC. So if you pull a GCIC, it won't show up. And then you have to seal the record, where you're actually sealing the court record. And then it's no longer public record. And when private background check companies pull their data from all those sources around the country, hopefully they will not see it and will not report it. All right. So it's important to know that backgrounds and the reports that you see are going to vary widely. If you're not directly involved in the process or haven't been up to this point, you may have this idea in your mind of what we're talking about, who we're talking about when we are talking about second chance hiring. You know, we're talking about the person who has served some time in prison and they're coming out and they need to make a fresh start, and they may be having trouble finding a job and a place to live. And that is certainly an important part of the population that we are talking about, and represents thousands of people in Georgia each year. But we are talking about a much broader range of people than that. And the people that we see in our office every day, it could be that the only thing on their arrest, on their record, is an arrest that was dismissed 10 years ago. It could be that they have one felony conviction, but it happened 30 years ago. Or it could be that they have a history of mental illness or homelessness or addiction, and they have an extensive history with multiple convictions, some of which may have happened recently. There's just, there is not a one size fits all approach for people with criminal records, because when you're talking about 4.3 million people in Georgia, it's a wide range of what we're talking about, who we're talking about when we are talking about people that have a criminal record. And I've just included some data down here to show that. So of those 4.3 million people, 49% of them have only one arrest on their record. 1.1 million of them, the only conviction that they have on their record is one misdemeanor conviction. And a much smaller percentage have a felony conviction, about 602,000. And of those, about 10% of those, 62,000, have what is defined as a serious violent felony conviction or a serious sexual offense conviction. So those are your more serious crimes like murder, or aggravated assault, or rape, the things that certainly most employers are most concerned about. So it is a very wide range, but what we see as attorneys is that what employers are often doing is they are lumping everybody that has a criminal record into one basket, and they are treating them the same. And if something comes back on the background, then they may be automatically denying them. I continue, knowing how tight the labor market is and how desperate a lot of employers are to hire, I continue to get surprised by sort of the minor things that people are denied for. Just to give you an example, I talked to a woman a few weeks ago. Her only conviction was a DUI, I think from about 4 years ago, and she was denied a job cooking in a restaurant as a result of that DUI, a job which did not require her to drive at all. I've had a client who was denied a job with a ride sharing service whose only conviction was for writing a bad check. Yes, that is a criminal conviction in Georgia, for less than $50, and it occurred about 20 years ago. And yet she was, they ran the background. They said, oh, you've got a financial crime on your record. We don't want drivers who have financial crimes on their records, so we are going to deny you. And they didn't dive any deeper into that. So what you should know as an employer about backgrounds, one, they are hard to understand, even for the person that has the record. So I showed all those different ways that a case can be resolved. Sometimes people don't understand how their own charges were resolved. It was likely probably one of the most stressful moments in their life. Perhaps they were arrested for a misdemeanor. They went to jail for a couple of days, and someone said, we'll give you time served and let you out. They may not have realized time served is a conviction. That means that I am pleading guilty to this, and it's going to appear on my record, and it might be a barrier to me for the rest of my life. I spent 2 days in jail. I didn't realize that this was going to keep going on for all time. Also, they may have been told by a judge or an attorney that something is going to fall off of their record. At GJP, we work with these records all the time. We are really deep into the law and understand what's going to show up. But most judges and attorneys are dealing with a case that comes in front of them and are not as knowledgeable about it. And sometimes they tell people, once you complete your sentence, it's going to fall off your record. Or if you plead to an ordinance violation from this misdemeanor, it's not going to show up on your record. And often they're just wrong, because things don't come off of your record automatically in Georgia. They may think that a charge has been expunged or is not going to show up. There's an urban myth out there that things fall off of your record after a certain period of time, that convictions are going to go away after 7 years and you don't have to report them, which isn't true. But people don't understand that. So for a while, we had heard from a lot of employers that they were using the background check as an honesty test. We just ask that you don't do that. When somebody says my record is wrong, I think you want to believe them, because, or if somebody says, they report their record wrong, it might not be that they are trying to deceive you. It might be that they just don't understand or remember how their background, what their background looks like and what those things on their background actually mean. Also, backgrounds are frequently wrong. If you use GCIC, you should know that GCIC, they start their records when somebody is arrested, and the law enforcement agency puts that record in there of all the charges that person was arrested for. In their database, they've got about 25 million individual charges, and about 6.7 million of them are missing information about how those charges were resolved. So about 25 to 30% of those charges, we have no way of knowing how that case was resolved. There may be records at the courthouse that would tell us, but they're not on the GCIC report. Also, there's just mistakes often on somebody's background. The one we see most frequently is that maybe they were convicted of a misdemeanor, a less serious crime, but the record says they were convicted of a felony. For private background checks, a particular concern is identity. So the GCIC database is a fingerprint match database. So hopefully the record that you're looking at belongs to the person that you are considering. But a private background check company, they are pulling this data from all around the country. And they're looking for a couple of data point match. They're looking for maybe a name and a date of birth. And then they're going to issue a report for anybody that has that match. I have had a client who his record came back saying that he was a sex offender with multiple rape convictions because he had a name that it wasn't John Smith, but it was very similar to John Smith, and that person had his same birthday. So sometimes records come back that are just about the wrong person. Also, there may be misleading information on a record. So when you're arrested, the cops can charge you with anything that they think there's a reasonable belief, any crime that they think you may have convicted. If you've dealt with law enforcement before, or you may know that the cops are usually going to charge up. They're going to charge you with the most serious conduct, and then they're going to leave it to the prosecutor to sort out whether or not there's really evidence to support whether or not the person actually committed this crime. It almost never goes the other way, that they're going to charge you with something minor, and then the DA or the prosecutor is going to go ahead and charge you with something more serious. Also, these background check reports may include information that actually has been expunged. So I mentioned, what we do is we help people clean up their records. So maybe we get their record restricted and sealed. But then we can't guarantee, and I always tell my clients, I can't guarantee that this is never going to show up for you again. So like I said, there's thousands of these background check companies. They're supposed to have procedures in place to continually update their information, but not all of them do it. And they still may be reporting old information prior to when the record was sealed. So you want to make sure that you are using a good private background check company. But you should be aware that none of them are great because they are relying often on incomplete records. And if an employer or if an applicant says to you, my record's wrong, and they get it corrected, you don't have a legal obligation to then consider that corrected record, but we would ask that you go ahead and do so. All right, so what can employers ask on a criminal background check? In Georgia, you can ask about everything. Doesn't mean that you should, but you can ask about everything. There's no state limit on asking about both arrests and convictions. So if you want to ask if you've ever been arrested in your entire lifetime, you can. If you want to ask if you've ever been convicted, you can. Unfortunately, even under Georgia law, if somebody gets their record expunged, you can still ask about that. But you probably, if you want to engage in second chance hiring, you probably want to consider whether or not that's the best strategy. So you can control what your private background check company pulls, and you probably want to do that. You want to work with them to create criteria for what you do want to ask about. Maybe you only want to ask about felonies. Maybe you only want to ask about felonies that occurred in the last 7 years. And one of the reasons to do that is that you can't use all of the information that you might see on somebody's background. Even though in Georgia you can ask about anything, under federal law, you can't necessarily use all that information. So there's no general prohibition on using criminal records to deny employment under federal law. There's nothing that says you can't discriminate against people with a criminal record. But what there is there's Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that says what you can't do in employment and hiring is discriminate against people based on race, ethnicity, age, national origin, or those other categories that we're familiar with. And so how is that relevant here if you can't discriminate? The one that's relevant, or the two that are relevant here, are race and ethnicity. So Doug talked about disparities in the criminal justice system, disparities that exist at every single stage of the system. Arrest, who gets targeted for arrest, who then gets taken into custody, who gets charged, whether or not they are convicted. All other things being equal, going back to the 80s, the federal government has recognized that there are great disparities in how the criminal justice system is applied to people of color, and particularly to Black people. And so what they said is under Title VII, which is enforced by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, you can't have blanket bans against hiring people with a criminal record. So maybe in Georgia, you can pull all the information, you can see everything, but what the federal government says, but you can't use it all. A couple of things to note about what they say. You have to treat all applicants the same. So you can't say, well, I'm going to check backgrounds on Black employees, but I'm not going to check backgrounds on white employees. So that's sort of common sense. So you have to treat everybody the same. But where those disparities in the criminal justice system come in is that you can't have policies that have a different impact based on race or ethnicity. So if I have a policy that says I'm not going to hire anybody with a financial crime, or I'm not going to hire anybody with any felony at all, that policy is going to have a different impact, particularly on Black people in this country, than it is going to have on white people. And so your policy may run afoul of the Civil Rights Act. So Wade is going to talk about this a little bit later, but the EOC has issued guidance to employers on how they can make sure that they are not violating the federal law on that. And the basic thing to know about that is that the policy that you have in place, you have to have a business necessity for that. So you can't just say, I'm going to, exclude everyone with a felony conviction, because that felony conviction may not be related to the job that you're hiring them for. You can't say, I'm just going to exclude everybody that has any crime within the last 10 years, because you might not have a valid reason for the operations of your business to have those exclusions. What the EOC says is that you have to do an individualized assessment of candidates, considering how old the offense was, how serious it was, and what it was, and whether or not it's even related to the job that you're applying for. And I know Wade's going to talk about that a little bit more. So a lot of times the way employers deal with this is they tell their background check company, I'm going to set certain criteria for what I want you to pull. I only want you to pull for 10 years, or for this position where people are going to be in somebody's home, I want you to pull for every violent offense, going back to, forever. Often employers may have multiple sets of criteria. So you as an employer, you should do that. You should set criteria. You should work with your private background check company and set criteria for the different positions and what the responsibilities of those positions actually are, so that you're not pulling more information than what you really want to see, because it's really hard to unring the bell once you've seen it. So what you should know about criminal records is that when you do pull a record, even if you've worked with your private background check company to tailor the criteria so that you're not pulling everything and you are limiting it to things that are relevant, it still may not give the full picture of who this individual is and what their suitability for the position is. Some things to know is that there are huge differences in how conduct is charged from state to state. So for example, for a theft charge, what's a felony in Georgia may be a misdemeanor in some other state. And Doug gave you some of the data in the beginning. So as you can imagine, in Georgia, the way our criminal justice system works is that we do tend to, have charge people for more things, charge people for more serious things. Also, if you are hiring young people, well, even if you're hiring older people, you should know that in Georgia, you become an adult for criminal justice purposes the day that you turn 17. Georgia is one of only 3 states that does this. In all of those other states, that person is considered a juvenile. And unless they were charged with a very serious crime, most likely their case is going to be handled in the juvenile system and is not going to appear on any background check report that you may pull. And why that's relevant is there's research that says 17 is really the peak age for when people are likely to commit a violent crime. So in if you are a multi-state employer, you might not be seeing things that somebody did when they're 17, but in Georgia, you are going to see them. And it may be 10, 15 years later and not have any relevance to who that person is now. Also, many charges may sound worse than what they actually are. Just to give you a couple of examples, a crime that we often see that the cops will charge people with is terroristic threats. People are almost never convicted of it. It usually gets dropped. That sounds really serious. That sounds like someone, I don't want somebody that's making terroristic threats. What it actually means is sort of fighting words, that person, there may have been an argument and the person who was charged with terroristic threats said, I'm going to mess you up. I'm going to beat you up. I'm going to, you better watch it. That is making a terroristic threat to somebody, and that is a felony offense. So, certainly when you see that, you may have a very different picture. Just a couple of other examples. Public indecency, okay, we don't want to hire anybody with a sex crime. That could mean that you got drunk and you urinated behind a bar. A wide range of behavior could be involved there. Cruelty to children in the third degree is one that comes up a lot. You may think as an employer, well, I don't want to hire somebody that has a cruelty to children charge. What that means is, maybe the cops were called to somebody's house and there were children in the house. They may have been sleeping, they may have been in the backyard, and there was an argument going on in the front yard. But feasibly, those children could have walked in and they could have seen an argument between their parents, whether there was any violence involved or not. And that looks really bad on somebody's record. So you need to dive deeper. Don't just be put off by what a charge says. You need to say, what was the conduct that was actually involved in this? As Doug mentioned, Georgia sentences are very long. So, if you're hiring people in California and people in Georgia, a crime that somebody committed in California may have a 1 or 2 year sentence, and here it may have a 5 or 10 year sentence. So you can't just assume that every state is the same. One of the things that Jeffrey Korzenik talked about a lot is knowing your felony, that not all felonies are the same. In Georgia, a felony offense, we don't have classes, so a felony offense can be anything that carries a sentence of 1 year on up to life imprisonment or even the death penalty. So there is an incredibly wide range of behavior there. So you really need to dive deeper into what actually the incident involved. And then just a couple of other points to make is that, a lot of times people want to say, well, I don't want to hire anybody that has a violent history. It's not always as easy to figure out what is violent and what was non-violent just by looking at the charges. You do really have to sort of dive deeper. And just because somebody committed a violent act when they were younger or one time doesn't mean that they are necessarily a violent person. So you need to dive deeper. Don't just rely, go ahead and set that, the criteria that you want for a background, but don't just rely on that to be the final part of your screening process. When something comes back unsatisfactory, this person has something on their record that may be of concern to us. Now let's look a little deeper and see what that actually was. So I did want to just touch briefly on, I mentioned that hopefully things aren't going to show up on people's records if they were able to get it expunged. Doug mentioned that we got a new expungement law passed last year, which went into effect this year. This was Senate Bill 288. And what you should be aware that it did is for people with a record, this was the first time that Georgia recognized rehabilitation and said people should be able to get some convictions sealed from their record. So employers aren't going to be able to see them because they're really just not relevant to their consideration of whether or not they're going to be a good employee. So a person can potentially restrict and seal up to 2 misdemeanor convictions on their record. And if they've received a pardon, which is a certificate of rehabilitation that's issued by the state Board of Pardons and Paroles, if they've received a pardon for a felony offense, as long as it's not a serious violent felony, then they may be able to get that restricted and sealed as well. You should know that only about 500 pardons are granted a year. So we're talking about a very limited number of people. So Wade is going to go into more deeply the liability protections that were in SB 288, but the main thing to know is it is limiting some of what you can see on a person's record. But like I said, private background check companies might still be reporting things that are expunged. So just you may not want to consider them if a person shows you proof that they have had their record expunged. So SB 288 fits into a whole scheme of laws that exist, many of which we have worked on, that allow people to do something to clean up their record. And I'm not going to go deep into that. We will drop some links for regular presentations that we do where we describe every way that a person might be able to clean up their record. And it is expanding, SB 288 expanded it. We also passed, Georgia passed a law last year that allowed certain survivors of sex trafficking and human trafficking to be able to clean up their record. So there are several different ways which somebody may be able to both restrict and seal their record so that you as an employer don't see it or shouldn't see it because it shouldn't be reported by a background company. So, that looks like a long list. That looks like a lot of ways that people can clean up their record. But what you should know as an employer is that Georgia's law is still very limited compared to other states in terms of what people can clean up their record on their record. So I mentioned we can do up to 2 misdemeanor convictions. There are limitations on what those misdemeanor convictions can be. And also I mentioned felonies can potentially be expunged if they were pardoned, but that's only a few hundred people a year who might be eligible for that remedy. So many thousands of people are being left out of what is eligible. We will often have employees or clients come into our office and say, well, an employer told me they will hire me if I go get my record expunged. So I'm here for you to expunge my record. But the law is limited. I might not be able to, it might be an ineligible offense. It may be that they just don't meet the time requirements yet. In Georgia, to get a misdemeanor conviction expunged from your record, you have to wait until 4 years after your sentence is completed. So say I got a 1-year probation sentence, I essentially have to wait 5 years until my case is resolved, until I can potentially get it expunged from my record. And the conduct, I may have been arrested for that offense even a year or 2 before that. So there is a long time in between when somebody may commit a crime and when they may be able to clean it up. And then the other thing is, in Georgia, anytime you want to seal your record, you have to ask a judge to do that for you. So you have to actually file something with the court. So we hope to move towards what other states are working on, and many other states there's momentum in other states where people are getting their records automatically expunged when they're older and they're not relevant and they shouldn't show up for employers, but that's not where we are yet. Everybody has to file a petition and get in front of a judge to seal their record. And there can be differences in accessibility to those services. Most people aren't able to, they're not comfortable going into a court and filing a petition on their own. They might not have access to an attorney. It may be harder in some locations in Georgia than it is in others nationwide. So Georgia has what's called a petition-based process. So you have to ask a court to seal your record, and then that court has to do a balancing test. What is the harm to this person versus the harm to society? And then they ultimately make the decision, okay, we're going to seal your record so it doesn't show up for an employer. So nothing goes away automatically. And as I said before, some sealed records may still show up even after that expungement process has been completed. So, you need to both set that criteria as an employer for what you want your private background check company to pull, but then you also need to individually consider those applicants after you get back that unsatisfactory determination to see, oh, maybe they're eligible for expungement, but they haven't been able to get it, or maybe this just isn't relevant. And the last thing I will say is that, you may be familiar with, as an employer, with Ban the Box. So Ban the Box is this movement that started about 20 years ago. where we're saying, a lot of people are being discouraged from even applying for a job because the second or the third question on the application is, have you ever been convicted or have you ever been arrested? So there was a movement to say, let's take that question off the application and let's not ask about somebody's criminal history until we've already interviewed them and we've said, you've got a good work history or you've got good skills or you are, you share our values and we want to bring you on board. Let's pull your background and see if there's anything that we need to be concerned about or talk about here. So nationwide, 10 states have banned the box for every employer in the state. And 20 states, including Georgia, have banned the box for public employers. So this means if I go to apply for a job with the state of Georgia, they shouldn't ask about my criminal record until they've decided that they're going to go ahead and offer me a job. Because of these laws and because a lot of companies operate nationally, they've banned the box themselves. So if I'm Target, I'm probably going to ban the box because in 10 states, I have to. I don't want to have a different application process for every state that I'm operating in. So I'm not going to ask about somebody's criminal record on the front end. I'm not going to ask them to say, hey, tell me what's on your record. Have you ever been convicted? Have you ever been arrested? They may not understand how to talk about that. I'm just going to wait and see what comes back on the report. That is a great thing for employers to do, even if they're not required to do it, but it might not be enough. So just a couple of other things to be aware of is to look at what your job listings are saying. What are your postings saying? Are they saying you have to have, maybe you want to engage in second chance hiring, but you haven't really reviewed your announcements, or the people that are writing your announcements might not be familiar with your need to engage and your desire to engage with second chance employees. So they may still be saying you must have a clean background. So make sure that you know sort of what you're putting out into the world and review your applications. What are your applications saying? Do you still have questions on your application that are asking, have you ever been convicted? Have you ever been arrested? Just an example of that. One of our partner organizations that we worked closely with on the new expungement law, they recently posted a job, and I looked at the application to see if anybody I know might be interested in it. And literally the third question on the application was, have you ever been convicted of a felony? So of course I called them up and said, is this really what you want to do? Because even if you plan to fairly consider that person, you might be discouraging them from applying. They might get to that question and say, oh boy, I've been down this road before. I know that my background is going to be a problem. So make sure that you know what is on your documents. It used to be the case, that nobody wanted to be on the list of second chance employers. People with a record would come to us and say, can you give me a list of all the employers that will hire, that engage in second chance hiring? And we knew a lot of companies that did, but that didn't want to publicly say, yeah, we're a second chance employer. That is not necessarily the case before. So I would say get on that list. Don't just make sure that your postings aren't excluding people. Make them inclusive and say, we're a second chance employer, so that people know that they will be fairly considered. Zandria is going to talk about connecting with nonprofit organizations. A couple of other things to consider. A lot of employers will say, okay, I'll consider somebody with a background, but not if they have a current case or not if they're on probation or parole. Doug talked about how many people are on probation in Georgia. 1 in 18 people are under correctional control. So you may want to rethink your policy of excluding all of those individuals from consideration. He also talked about how long our probation sentences are. 40% of them are over 10 years. So whatever may have led to that person being on probation may have happened a long time ago and may not have any bearing on who they are today and their ability to be a good employee. So you want to perhaps consider those folks. And then the last thing I wanted to say about that is, even if a person has pending charges, those have usually been sort of an untouchable group of folks. It can take, particularly for even for a misdemeanor case, a case that only holds a sentence of potentially up to 12 months, it could take 2 years for that case to be resolved. And in the pandemic, we had the courts that were sitting still and not resolving cases now for over a year. So something may have happened several years ago, and those charges may still be pending. So you may want to consider those folks as well. So the last thing I will say is, make sure your process is intentional and consistent with your values. Set a background check criteria with your private company. Make sure that they are working with you to set criteria that are related to the job. And even if you get an unsatisfactory determination, don't let it be the end of the conversation, because it might not be a true reflection of what actually happened. And it certainly might not be a reflection of who that person is today and any efforts that they have made towards rehabilitation and education. And I am going to stop sharing my slides. Happy to answer any questions at the end, and turn it over to Meg Taylor, who is going to talk about how Delta is implementing this.
Thank you, Brenda, and thank you to Doug and the entire GJP team. Delta has had a very rich history of working with GJP, both with our law department participating in the expungement program, as well as us partnering on policy discussions and legislative initiatives. And so we are very proud of the work that GJP does and the work that we do with them. So for Delta, second chance hiring is really a balance. As a heavily regulated safety and security based industry, there are federal regulations that limit our ability to hire individuals with criminal convictions into certain roles that are airport based and have access to secured areas. So pilots, flight attendants, mechanics, employees within the airport. But we're also a brand sensitive, customer facing business. So we are always sensitive about making sure that we are protecting both the company's assets and our customers' private and financial information. So for us, we really struck a balance by looking at our policies and seeing where we could improve them to be more inclusive, looking at our processes, and some of the things that Brenda talked about, being intentional about aligning with your values. So we make sure that when we are posting jobs, we are posting them for a minimum of 7 days to allow a broad spectrum of individuals to learn about and then have an opportunity to apply for positions. We've also taken a fresh look at our job descriptions and our publications that describe our positions, and what are the basic qualifications that we are looking for, and are they really appropriately tailored for the role? So previously, Delta had a requirement that you needed a college degree to be hired by the company, and over time we really reevaluated that and said, is that necessary? And we concluded it was not. And so we removed that college degree requirement from a large number of positions, and also allowed individuals to demonstrate through experience as opposed to education qualifications for roles. We also make sure that we have a diverse panel of individuals who are reviewing job applications and candidates, so that you just don't have a single hiring manager. And this way you minimize the opportunity for either conscious or unconscious bias seeping into the program. We also don't ask for any criminal records information until after a conditional job offer is made. And when we do receive that criminal information, we have a very seasoned cross-divisional team of individuals from our legal department, our HR department, and our business units that really dig into and analyze that, that conviction information. And these individuals are knowledgeable about all of the traps that Brenda talked about, the fact that records can be misleading, they can be hard to understand, they can be wrong. Individuals can have mistaken beliefs about the criminal record. And so we look at those really with a view towards trying to assume the best intentions of individuals and giving them a full opportunity to be heard. We look at the recency of the conviction. We look at the context behind the conviction. What point in this person's life did it occur? Was this youthful indiscretion? Was it they were part of a broader group of individuals that got swept in? We allow for, a full hearing on all of those factors that may impact our decision making. We also look very actively at evidence of rehabilitation. So when individuals can point to periods of success and legal compliance, or they're able to point to mentors or partnerships with programs like GJP or other, church and community organizations, that can be a real game changer for us. So for us, our second chance hiring is really just part of our broader diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy, and one that we are continuing to review and evolve so that we can continue to try to be a leader in this space. Thank you. Oh, and I'm passing it on to Wade Askew. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Megan. Hi, everyone. My name is Wade Askew. I'm one of the supervising attorneys here at Georgia Justice Project. So thank you so much again for joining us this morning. What I'll be focusing my time on is liability protection for employers. And so I'll be trying to cram what could be a law school lecture's worth of information into a few minutes. So hopefully this will be both comprehensive, but also enough to digest. So I'll touch briefly on some of the main employer concerns that we hear. Like I said, I'm going to focus on liability, but then we'll briefly touch on both reputation and the bottom line for the business when engaging in second chance hiring. So when we're talking about liability, what we're really most often talking about is negligent hiring. Now, what is negligent hiring? That's the concept that if an employer is either hiring or retaining someone, they just need to exercise ordinary care when making those hiring and retention decisions. So a negligent hiring lawsuit can happen when, first of all, the employer doesn't exercise that ordinary care. And then after that, the relevant employee goes and causes some type of foreseeable damage, a foreseeable type of damage to someone else in the course of their employment. And so in these lawsuits, the key question is it foreseeable that a certain employee would cause a certain type of harm that has been suffered by a plaintiff? So for example, if I have an employee who has a prior conviction of shoplifting, and then on the job, they physically attack a customer, am I going to be liable for negligent hiring? The answer in that case is probably going to be no, because this nonviolent past offense for shoplifting doesn't make it foreseeable at all that the person might go and physically attack a customer. So that would not be an example of negligent hiring. Now, in Georgia, we actually have some of the strongest protections in the country protecting employers from negligent hiring lawsuits. Brenda mentioned briefly SB 288, that it created some of these protections. So what SB 288 does, first in the technical sense, and then I'll get into really what that means in real terms. In a technical sense, what it says is in a civil lawsuit, the criminal history of an employee or a former employee cannot be admitted as evidence if any of the following apply. So information about someone's criminal background can't even make it into the courtroom if either the conviction was restricted or sealed, or as Brenda explained, expunged, or it was pardoned, or the arrest in this case did not lead to a conviction. It's a non-conviction record, meaning I was arrested, but charges were dropped, or I was found not guilty. Or number three, okay, I was convicted. I haven't had this offense expunged. I haven't had this offense pardoned. However, the actual nature of this criminal history is not relevant to the facts that led to the lawsuit. And we'll give some more guidance on that in just a second. So the bottom line is, if any of these three scenarios apply, then that criminal record cannot be a factor in the negligent hiring lawsuit. So thinking a little bit about what is relevant. If I have this conviction record, it hasn't been expunged, it hasn't been pardoned, how do I know if it is related, if it's relevant? As we mentioned earlier, the EEOC put out some guidance about a decade ago that can help us here. And so what the EEOC says is that we should be considering at least three things. One is, what is the nature and gravity of this crime? How serious is it? Two is, how much time has passed since this offense happened or since the person completed their sentence? Doug spoke a little bit about some of the research that we have. Desistance research is what we call it, of when someone with a criminal record is no more likely than anyone else in the general population to commit another offense. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but that's the concept here. How much time has passed? And then number three, is this offense actually related to the worker's ability to perform this particular job? So for example, Brenda mentioned a client who had a DUI record, but they were applying to work in a restaurant with no driving involved. Does the offense actually have any relationship to the ability to perform this job? So those are what we look at, what the EEOC recommends looking at when considering, is an offense actually relevant? The EEOC has other recommendations for hiring. I won't get too much into that because Brenda talked about earlier some of our recommendations for how to exercise its discretion in hiring, but you can also check out the EEOC guidance, which is available online if you'd like to see more there. So talking a little bit more about how much time has passed since this offense. Do I need to be worrying? One, if I'm hiring someone, their conduct in the workplace, but also two, in a negligent hiring lawsuit, is this something that I can point to if something does happen to say, we were exercising ordinary care, we considered how much time passed? Well, as Doug mentioned earlier, what data shows us is that most recidivism happens within 3 years of an arrest, and almost all recidivism happens within 5 years. And so at a certain point, someone with a criminal record is no more likely than the general population to be arrested again. So there's multiple factors that are relevant in determining exactly how long that is for any individual person, how much time needs to have passed before they are no more likely than anyone else to be arrested. An example in this research is that an 18-year-old who is arrested for burglary, which is typically considered to be a fairly serious offense, that they're actually no more likely to be arrested again than anyone else on this call if about 4 years pass without a new arrest. So the last factor here is, again, as we mentioned earlier, folks with jobs are twice as likely to avoid arrest than their unemployed counterparts. So these are all factors that when you're making that hiring decision, when you're evaluating how much time has passed, are really at play in making, again, a reasonable decision, which is what you need should something happen in the future and you're worried about liability. Now, sorry, I jumped ahead a little bit there. Program and treatment completion certificates. This is another form of protection in the state of Georgia. So we have those SB 288 protections. We also have these program and treatment completion certificate protections. So what are these? They're certificates that are issued by the Department of Community Supervision and the Department of Corrections. And what they do is they demonstrate efforts toward rehabilitation, program participation, things of that nature. And so if someone has those a certificate issued that's related to a particular offense on their record, then that can also have a powerful effect on negligent hiring lawsuits. So what it does is it actually creates a presumption that you exercise due care when hiring or retaining or training or admitting to a program, any of those things. It creates a presumption that you exercise due care in bringing that person on board. And so we are presumed that the employer was not negligent with respect to that conviction or those convictions that have a certificate attached to them. Now, lastly, very briefly, I just want to talk about the reputation and bottom line concerns that we hear. First is on the point of reputation and public perception. As many of you know, and many folks on this call today are very outward about the fact, they tout the fact that they are second chance employers. And actually, it, for many, has become really a point of pride and a point to promote in the community that they are second chance employers. So for example, a large group of major employers nationally launched the Second Chance Business Coalition. You can go to that website there to see a list of some of the corporation businesses that are part of an effort to promote second chance hiring in a very outward and public way. Also, there are bottom line benefits to employers of being second chance employers. Data shows that those hiring with folks with criminal records experience better retention, less turnover, and there's even evidence that folks with records are more motivated to do better in their job when they get the opportunity. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my wonderful colleague, social worker and reentry employment specialist, Zandria Redding, to discuss partnerships and practical considerations.
Thanks, Wade. Sorry, mute button. Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy you're able to join us this morning. I'm going to briefly talk to you this morning about partnerships and practical considerations for employers that are looking to expand their second chance hiring. First, I want to give you a little background on GJP and employment. GJP is often served as a bridge between clients and employment. As Doug previously mentioned, we did start New Horizon Landscaping back in 1993 as an effort to assist clients that were coming out of jail or prison find employment quickly. This helped them begin a successful transition back to the community. And this company operated for about 17 years before transitioning over into offering what we have now, which we call our GJP Work Matters program. Our Work Matters program allows us to provide clients with information on how to complete a successful job search. We assist with explaining their background, providing resume assistance and interview prep, and just as a one-stop shop for our clients that are looking for assistance with employment. It's a really successful program. It's working out great, and we've been able to place several clients into really great positions. So from there, we wanted to talk a bit further about how to connect employers to second chance hires and how we do that. It's kind of where I come into play. I often work with second chance hires and companies. And so what I do is a door-to-door process, telling employers about the great things that we're doing at GJP and the great benefits of working with second chance hires. In addition to those programs, I know Doug previously mentioned our work at Metro Reentry facility. We also offer reentry services alongside the reentry lawyering that we're doing. That allows for us to prepare returning citizens for employment by removing any legal barriers that they have and by anything that may hinder them from release. We also connect them with second chance employers that we know are hiring. So once they're out the door, they're usually equipped with a job and they're ready to begin their transition back into society. Working with Metro Reentry Facility has also introduced us and helped us gain a lot of knowledge on transitional centers. Transitional centers are also offered under Georgia Department of Corrections. They are a work release program offered to currently incarcerated individuals, and it allows them to work and slowly reintegrate back into society. There are about 12 state transitional centers and about 5 county transitional centers throughout Georgia. 3 are within the metro area. And if you're able to reach out to them, they can assist you with hiring individuals that are still currently incarcerated. So what's working? What works to recruit and retain new hires? As an employer, you always want to have supportive employment practices. You want to evaluate what supportive services are needed, not only for second chance hires to begin working, but to continue working. You want to offer services that wraparound services, anything that can support your new hire and get them to continue working after starting. You can also offer employment opportunities with career paths that offer economic mobility. New hires find value in knowing that there's room for growth within the organization. If a new hire knows that they're able to come in and move up the ladder and earn more money and better pay, they're more likely to stay at that particular job. You also want to understand the skill gaps for those that are re-entering the workforce. Recently being released from incarceration may not be a new hire's only barrier. There are also things to think of like deep poverty or a lack of mentorship could also be a contributing factor. Some have never worked before. Some have, I've particularly dealt with clients who have an employer call me and say, hey, this guy didn't show up for work this morning. And I'll call the guy and say, hey, what's going on? And they were sick. They just didn't realize that, hey, I'm sick. I can't just stay home. I have to also let my employer know. So being flexible and understanding these factors are very important with retaining second chance hires. You can also partner with nonprofits and specialized staffing agencies. These organizations are awesome with assisting with screening and creating a reliable work-ready pool of applicants. So who's doing the work? These are just a few of the many employers in the metro area, organizations in the metro area that work directly with returning citizens and are able to provide services and help you build that talent pool. First Step Staffing, I saw Brian White has already mentioned some of the great work that they do. They're an alternative staffing agency that offers employment to those that are experiencing homelessness, veterans, and returning citizens, alongside supportive services. So they include things like job coaching and transportation, as well as benefits assistance for those that need it, as well as the Center for Employment Opportunities, or CEO. They offer immediate employment to those who are recently released from prison or on probation. CEO offers job readiness and transitional employment to acclimate returning citizens back into the current workforce. WorkSource Georgia, I've seen a lot of participants today from WorkSource Georgia. They offer training to job seekers and they assist employers with screening potential new hires. They conduct on-the-job training, incumbent training, registered apprenticeships, and workplace fundamentals for those that you already have working. There are plenty of other agencies in the metro area to do this work. You have Goodwill, Georgia Works, City of Refuge. There are also great organizations that partner with returning citizens and assist with second chance hiring. We'll definitely be sending out some resources with that information at the end of the presentation as well. So lastly, we want to talk about some incentives and protections for those that do hire second chance hires. We have the federal bonding program. The federal bonding program, I'm sure a lot of you may already be familiar with. This program offers limited liability coverage to employers when they hire new applicants who cannot be bonded through their own insurance. This program can insure employers against theft and forgery and embezzlement for up to $5,000 for a 6-month period. At the end of that 6-month period, you are able to extend coverage based on the situation, and you're also able to increase coverage. This can be done with the Department of Labor. All the new hire has to do is go to the Department of Labor. They receive their bonding letter and they're bonded from the date of their hire until the 6 months after. You also have the Work Opportunity Tax Credit. The Work Opportunity Tax Credit is a federal tax credit. It's available for anybody that's hiring a specific targeted group, which includes returning citizens and second chance hires. This credit can range from $1,200 to $9,600 per qualified employee. To claim this credit, you have to fill out IRS Form 8850 or ETA Form 9060 within the first 28 days of hire for your new hire. Again, links to these forms will also be provided at the end of the presentation. So lastly, I want to take a moment to introduce Mr. Lloyd Martin. He is the VP of Manufacturing with CKS Packaging, a company who has done wonderful things when it comes to hiring returning citizens and working with second chance hires. We can almost say they helped start the mold. So I would love for Lloyd to join me on screen. Hi.
Whoa.
So Lloyd, just a few questions for you that may be able to assist the other employers that are listening about your organization and your process with working with new second chance hires. We know CKS Packaging is really faith motivated. This kind of helped a lot with starting this process. But we'd love for you to share some more about your hiring policies and experiences over the years, that have helped to evolve the support system that you offer for employees today.
Okay, so as a background, anyway, people can go to ckspackaging.com if you want to know more about our company and our faith-based ownership, and go to Maximum Impact. So in April of 2016, we formally decided we were going to start a second chance program, and started with some homeless people down in Atlanta at the Safe House, and thinking that if we could hire 5 people and have them sustained employees at the end of the year, that would be very successful. Within a couple months, that led us to rehab programs and prison release programs in that same year. And at the end of that year, we had almost 100 sustained employees in our company from our second chance program. And that made us, we didn't start our program because it's something that we wanted a tax credit for, or for employment needs or anything like that. But it became clear through all of our learnings anyway, that we were finding some very good talent to come out of this program. We had people that had electromechanical degrees, for instance. We were finding people that could be quality techs. And now 5 years later, I'm happy to say that almost 10% of our workforce is second chance employees that have been sustained, have not went back into recidivism. And we have a lot of great success stories. I have a production manager in our Kansas City plant who came out of 7 years in prison for drug-related charges. We have quite a few quality managers. We have a maintenance manager. So we have managers that have grown into those positions and been promoted from our second chance programs. And we continue to work now, not just with 14 or 15 now, different organizations around Atlanta, but we also work with organizations in Texas, Kansas, Missouri, Florida, and Connecticut on prison release programs, rehab programs, and homeless shelters.
Okay, awesome. I know we're really close on time, so I did want to try to get one more question out of you really quickly. When for an employer that's starting up, they're trying to start the second chance hiring process, was there anyone in CKS that may have needed some convincing, or how did you let others in the company know that this just makes more business sense? And what did you do to bring them along on your journey?
Okay, so first of all, because our owners are faith-based, as you had mentioned earlier, I've had a lot of support from our owners and the rest of the senior leadership team to start this program and make it formal. I think some of our convincing had to be done at a few of our 27 manufacturing plants. But once that happened and our program took off, we learned a lot from it in the last 5 years, especially the difference between reentry and reintegration, which I think Doug mentioned earlier and has been kind of touched on throughout this presentation. And we also, one of the things or benefits that we got out of it, I think, and could share best practices among all the 27 manufacturing plants, is that our leadership started growing from it. We started to learn how to be better leaders. We learned to take better perspective of our employees. As we say, seek first to understand and then to be understood. And it really has driven our leadership to become more of a servant leader organization. Did that answer your question?
Definitely, definitely. Well, I know I have a ton more questions I could ask you, and I know we're definitely close on time. I want to see if I can ask one more. Anne, could you give me a thumbs up? Or
no, I think we got to skip to Doug now.
okay, I'm sorry. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Lloyd. I'm going to pass it off to our fearless leader, Doug Amar.
Andrea and Lloyd, thank you so much. Appreciate all you've done, Lloyd, and all you continue to do. And Xandria, thanks for all your great work. I think, Ann, do we have time for any questions? I'm gonna look to our fearless moderator behind the scenes to make sure, I know we're over time. I know there's been a lot of information and I've been trying to type some answers to folks. But Ann, do we have a chance to answer any more
I
questions?
think let's go through this, and if people would like to stay after, why don't we do
Okay.
questions then?
All right. All right, thank you, Ann. So I just want to mention a couple things. We continue to push policy relating to workforce development and relating to barriers to reentry for folks who've been touched by the criminal justice system. And we have 3 very specific agenda items this year that we're pushing. And the first one's around occupational licensing and the barriers the criminal record creates. The second is around driver's license suspensions. And the third is around continuing to expand expungement, particularly for felonies. And all 3 of these, a number of folks on this call, we've already started to talk to. We know the chamber is, the Georgia Chamber, and I believe the Metro Chamber as well is supporting this, because all of these are barriers to the workforce issue and the labor force issue. So we would love to, if you all, anybody here wants to help us continue to move policy at the State House, we'd love for your help. We can talk more about these. I won't go into much detail. I will say just that the volume of people on the driver's license issue is quite astounding, and the barriers that creates for employment has been an eye-opening issue for us, and it's come out of our work out at the Metro Reentry facility, as Andrea talked about. So I just want to make sure you know what we're working on coming up, and we'd love your help on that. And here, this last slide, I guess, next to last slide, was really just ways, if you say, hey, I want to get involved, I want to help, what can I do? We've already posted a number of information. By the way, we have more information around employment and the barriers and the studies, et cetera. You can help us, of course, by supporting us financially. You can help us by volunteering. You know, Charlie did a great job, as well as Meg, about talking about ways they, as lawyers and their companies, have helped both on representing individuals, but as well as helping us on the policy front. So you can help us that way as well. And of course, reach out. Here's some contact information for those who've been on this call today. You can hopefully reach us a number of ways, but these are just some of the ways. And again, the very bottom, if you're interested in helping on the advocacy front, and helping to move the needles, as we're saying, getting Georgians back to work is how we're labeling our agenda for this year. We'd love your help on that front as well. So with that, Ann, do we have time? I know we've gone a little bit over. Do we have time for any questions or last comments from our esteemed panelists and friends from the Chamber and Microsoft and Delta and CKS package?
I think that ends our program, and we're at past 10 o'clock. So if people would like to stay on and ask questions and you'd be willing to answer them, Doug, I think we can do that. But I think that's up to others.
Okay, how about we'll stay on for about 10 or so minutes if folks have questions, and if our panelists are here, great. If not, you get the wisdom of a handful of nonprofit lawyers here on Edgewood Avenue. Well, let me just give Nancy and Daniela, just since you all are both here and still on, thank you for staying with us, and our friends from the Georgia Chamber. Is there anything you'd like to add? Anything that just jumped out at you, or you want to just accentuate or talk about here at the very end of our program?
Well, yeah, I think that what I would like everyone to know for any companies that are interested in this, obviously GJP is a wonderful resource, but also we're happy to help wherever we can. And then additionally, you know, my job in government affairs is looking forward to the next legislative session, and we're looking forward to hopefully working with GJP and other partners to expand some of the expungement access and deal with some of these barriers to entry. So as we get into the legislative session, we're happy to have through our Government Affairs Council. We would love to hear from companies that are interested in this, and we're looking forward to getting some stuff done as the next 2022 session comes up.
Thank you.
And
Thank you,
Doug, I'll
Nancy.
just add too that we are really, spending a lot of time. Nancy runs the government affairs shop and does a really great job at the Capitol, but we are also doing a lot to try to educate employers through our programming and events, and appreciate your participation in previous events too. And we'll continue to do that just to make sure everyone knows kind of what the rules and regs are, and the opportunities to improve policy as well.
That's great. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Daniela. That's great. We appreciate the partnership and the support, and we look forward to working even more closely this year with you guys. So thank you for that. And we do think this is really one area that is the overlap of economic interests and business interests and the needs of those that we serve overlaps entirely in a incredibly way that we can all work together.